It was a quiet, sunny morning in what was supposed to be a peaceful neighborhood in Sugar Land, Texas. It was the kind of place where people nodded politely at each other and kids rode their bikes in circles. The biggest controversy was whether the mailman actually delivered on time. That is how it used to be, before Pamela decided she was the queen of the cul-de-sac. Pamela wasn't just any neighbor. She was the neighbor. She appointed herself as the guardian of all things petty. Clipboard in hand, she prowled the sidewalks scanning for violations. A garden gnome courageous. A car parked slightly over the imaginary line. She had drawn in her head unacceptable. She had a list and she was checking it twice. Except this wasn't Christmas and Pamela was far from Santa. I had lived in my home for years minding my own business. I tended to my lawn and generally avoided unnecessary drama. But Pamela had a different plan. She strutted up to my driveway, her posture screaming self-importance. She pointed at my mailbox like it had personally offended her. "That's not regulation height." Her voice carried the smug certainty of someone who had appointed herself Meadowbrook Estates HOA president. I simply blinked at her. "I'm not in the HOA." Her expression completely froze. It was the face of someone whose entire worldview had just been shaken. It was like telling a die-hard flat earther that globes actually exist. For a brief moment, I thought that would be the end of it. I hoped logic would prevail, and she would move on to measuring someone else's mailbox. I was so wrong. This wasn't just about rules. This was about control. Pamela wasn't about to let a non-member ruin her perfectly curated neighborhood dictatorship. This was only the beginning of a very long battle. The next day, I found a piece of paper taped to my front door. At first glance, it looked official. It was typed in bold font with phrases like notice, a violation and failure to comply. But a closer look revealed the sender, Pamela Neighborhood Standards Representative. That wasn't a real title in any legal sense. I sighed, peeling the paper off the door and reading her list of grievances. My trash cans had been left out 30 minutes too long after pickup. My grass was approximately half an inch taller than it should be. Then there was her absolute personal favorite complaint. The color of my front door was unapproved and disruptive to the neighborhood aesthetic. It was beige. It was the exact same beige that half the houses on the street had. I crumpled the notice and tossed it in the trash. I assumed that would be the absolute end of it. Pamela wasn't one to let things go. That evening, she reappeared with her clipboard in hand. She tapped her pen against it, like a drill sergeant preparing for battle. "I noticed you ignored the notice," I laughed. I folded my arms and stared right back at her. I didn't ignore it. I read it. Then I threw it away. Her lips pressed into a thin, angry line. "This isn't optional. You don't fix these violations. There will be serious consequences." "Like what?" I asked, genuinely curious how far she thought she could take this. She huffed, clearly expecting me to back down immediately. "Finds possible legal action." I let out a short laugh, Pamela. "I'm not in the HOA. You have absolutely no authority over my property." The sheer horror on her face was absolutely priceless. She blinked rapidly, processing my words as if they were spoken in a foreign language. "That doesn't matter, you live here. The rules apply to everyone." I was about to argue, but then I realized something very important. This wasn't about HOA regulations at all. It wasn't even about me. It was about Pamela's desperate need to feel in charge. She wanted to wield whatever tiny sliver of authority she thought she had over the neighborhood. Unfortunately for me, I had just become her newest project. I really could have ignored her. It could have gone about my life, pretending Pamela and her clipboard didn't exist. But people like her thrive on a lack of resistance. Give them an inch and suddenly, they are measuring your grass with a ruler and filing complaints about the shade of your mailbox. I decided to have a little fun the next morning. I repainted my front door. It wasn't neon green as Pamela might have feared. It was the exact same shade of beige it had been before. Then I printed out a document with an official-looking letterhead and left it in my window. This property is not governed by the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. Any complaints should be directed to the wind. It took exactly 2 hours for Pamela to show up. She stood on the sidewalk squinting at my door. Then at the sign, then back at my door. She pulled out her phone, snapped a picture, and furiously typed something. It was probably an email to an imaginary HOA board that held emergency meetings. Just to discuss my property. Later that evening, I got a text message from my neighbor, Mike. "Dude, Pamela is fuming. She says you're mocking the integrity of the neighborhood. Integrity over a paint color that hadn't even changed." I laughed and texted him back. "Did she measure my grass yet?" "Oh, she definitely did." I peeked out my front window. Sure enough, there she was. She was standing in my yard with a ruler in hand. She dramatically inspected my lawn like a detective at a crime scene. I stepped outside to confront her. "Pamela, do you need help?" She jumped, caught red-handed in her ridiculous inspection. "Your grass is longer than regulation height." I stared at her blankly. "Again, not in the HOA." She pursed her lips tightly. "That doesn't mean you can just ignore community standards." I held back a massive grin. "Oh, I don't ignore them. I just interpret them creatively." She stormed off, muttering something about further action. I had no idea what that meant. But one thing was certain. Pamela was not done with me yet. Word spread fast. By the next day, the entire street knew about the great HOA showdown between me and Pamela. Some people found it hilarious. Others were cautiously watching from the sidelines, waiting to see who would come out victorious. Mike, my next-door neighbor, was the first to officially take my side. "Dude, she's losing it," he whispered conspiratorially by our mailboxes. "She came to my house last night and told me my porch light was too bright for a neighborhood harmony." "What does that even mean?" "Did you ask her for the official lumens limit in the non-existent neighborhood rule book?" I joked, "Oh, I did." She told me not to get smart with her. Apparently, I wasn't the only one Pamela had been harassing. The old couple down the street got a sternly worded letter about their garden flamingos. A single mom got an earful about her kids, leaving bikes in the driveway, and Mikey actually got fined. He got fined for having his trash cans visible for more than 15 minutes. After pickup, the best part? The fine was handwritten by Pamela herself. But not everyone was against her. A small group of self-important neighbors had started backing her up aggressively. They were the ones who nodded furiously at HOA meetings and whispered about maintaining standards while clutching their organic lattes. "She has a binder, man," Mike said, shaking his head. "A binder full of complaints. She calls it the neighborhood offenders list." This was getting ridiculous. It wasn't just about my grass anymore. It was a full-blown suburban Cold War. While I had been perfectly fine with passive-aggressively resisting, I realized Pamela wasn't going to stop until she either broke me or got her way. It was time to escalate. Pamela wasn't slowing down. If anything, my refusal to bend to her imaginary rules only made her more determined. The complaint letters escalated. The clipboard became a permanent fixture in her hand. Then one afternoon, she did the unthinkable. She actually called 911. I was in my backyard enjoying a beer when I heard the sirens. Not one, but 2 police cars rolled up in front of my house. For a split second, I thought something serious had happened. I thought there was a break-in or a terrible accident. I assumed it was something that actually warranted this level of response. Nope. Pamela stood in my driveway with her arms crossed. Her lips were pursed in satisfaction as the officers stepped out. One of them looked exhausted, like he knew this was a massive waste of time. I set my beer down and walked over. "Is there a problem, officers?" One of them sighed deeply. "She claims you're trespassing." I blinked in pure confusion. On my own property, Pamela stepped forward aggressively. This land is governed by the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. He is in violation and refuses to comply. Kada if he won't follow the rules. He shouldn't be allowed to live here. The officer rubbed his temples in frustration. Ma'am, we don't handle HOA disputes. It's not a dispute, it's law. She screeched, waving her ever-present clipboard. I crossed my arms, barely holding back my laughter. Officer, I own this property. I am not in the HOA. The second officer glanced at Pamela. Ma'am, is he legally bound to HOA rules? Well, technically, no. But the first officer immediately turned his attention to me. You're free to go, I grinned widely. Awesome, since I'm already home. I think I'll stay. Pamela's face turned a shade of red I had previously only seen on malfunctioning electronics. But he's ruining the neighborhood. The officer gave her a long, incredibly tired look, ma'am. Unless he's committing a crime. You can't keep calling the police over personal grievances. That was when it happened. The ultimate moment of defeat. The officer handed her an official warning for the misuse of emergency services. Mike had come outside to watch. He let out an audible ooh, like we were at a rap battle. Pamela stood frozen, her mind was clearly short-circuiting at the realization that she had lost. Just like that, the tide turned. The moment Pamela got that warning, something in the neighborhood shifted dramatically. It was as if everyone had been holding their breath, waiting for her to finally push things too far. And she had. The police leaving without so much as a second glance at me was the first domino to fall. The next was the highly anticipated Meadowbrook Estates HOA meeting. I normally wouldn't have bothered attending an HOA meeting since I wasn't a member, but after Pamela's spectacular 911 meltdown, Mike convinced me this meeting was worth witnessing. She's losing it, man, he whispered as we walked into the community center together. She's trying to get them to extend HOA authority to non-member homes. For the greater good, I nearly choked on my water. That's not even legally possible. Oh, she knows that. But she thinks if she throws a big enough tantrum, they'll just let her do whatever she wants. And oh boy, did she try. Pamela stood at the front of the room with her binder in hand. She dramatically flipped through pages as she ranted about community integrity and problematic residents. When she gestured vaguely in my direction, I gave her a very cheerful wave. The HOA board members, bless their tired souls, were completely done. One of them, an older man who looked like he had survived multiple Karens, sighed deeply and adjusted his glasses. Pamela, he said, in the tone of an exhausted father speaking to a misbehaving child, we cannot govern properties that are not part of the HOA, but they should be, she argued. If we let him get away with whatever he wants, then everyone will think they can just ignore the rules. Someone in the back muttered, because they can. A few chuckles followed the HOA president's side again. And rubbed his temples, Pamela. This is not up for debate. And frankly, we've had multiple complaints about you overstepping your authority. Her face went completely pale. Excuse me. A woman from the board pulled out a stack of papers. She was clearly holding back her amusement. We received several reports about you issuing fake violation notices and attempting to find residents without proper authorization. She paused, raising an eyebrow and calling the police over grass height. Pamela sputtered loudly. That was an emergency. The HOA president completely ignored her. Effective immediately, you are removed from any neighborhood committees. You are no longer authorized to distribute notices, warnings, or fines. If you continue, you will be the one facing severe penalties. The silence in the room was absolutely deafening. Pamela opened her mouth, closed it, and then grabbed her precious binder. She stormed out, knocking over a plastic chair in the process. The door slammed behind her, and the neighborhood finally felt at peace. Just to celebrate, half the street put up inflatable lawn decorations that weekend. They were gaudy over the top, HOA-valating Christmas decorations right in the middle of July. Life in the neighborhood returned to a much better, happier version of normal. It was a normal that didn't involve Pamela, lurking around with a clipboard, searching for crimes against suburban perfection. People started leaving their trash cans out a little longer. Garden gnomes multiplied like a cheerful little army on everyone's front lawns. Mike's cat reclaimed his rightful place on every lawn. In the cul-de-sac, as for Pamela, she laid low for a while at first. She still stomped around the neighborhood with her arms crossed, muttering under her breath whenever she saw a violation she couldn't control. But without her fake authority, she was just a grumpy lady with too much time on her hands. And then one day she was gone. The official word was that she and her husband moved to a more structured community. We all knew it meant an HOA where she could rule unchallenged. No one threw a going-away party, but Mike and I did share a celebratory drink in our driveways when the moving truck finally disappeared. The best part, the HOA never bothered me again. I didn't receive a single passive-aggressive letter or one ridiculous demand, it turns out. The actual board members weren't interested in picking unnecessary fights with homeowners who weren't even under their jurisdiction. They just wanted Pamela to stop giving them headaches. So the neighborhood was peaceful and quiet once more. To make sure it stayed that way, I made a small but permanent addition to my front yard. I installed a custom mailbox decal that proudly read, "Not in the HOA, just in case another Karen ever thought about trying me.